I told God, if you want me to make this work, you're going to have to make it impossible for me to do anything else. Because only then will I know. If you're thinking about liturgical art, the art is in the service of the community reinforcing its beliefs and teaching its people what the truth of the world is. If you're trying to express a thing, you're doing it wrong, because you don't have to try.
Yeah.
It's just going to happen.
So Luke and I, we are convinced that artistic expression, and we usually talk about this in the form of narrative and story, but all sorts of artistic expression help tune the way we see the world. And we've talked a lot about the way that, I think AI might distort that in some sense, and so that we need to touch grass, right? But as an artist, how do you see art contributing to the way that we see the world, and helping us inhabit the world in new ways?
So when I think about, so I'm going to connect this to your talk about narrative and stories. And I'm imagining that you are reading these stories or hearing these stories. These are either oral or written stories.
Yeah.
Any form of visual or performative, or I would even call it structural art, because I'm going to include architecture in this.
Yeah.
Takes things that are in the physical world and manipulates them to tell a story or express an idea. So we have these words and these symbols that we use in narrative stories that are very powerful, but then those ideas exist in space, and we can also illustrate them in pictures. We can also take materials that function in the world in I feel like this is kind of a comedic way to use things. It's like, what if you took a bicycle and tried to use it underwater? You would be using it not for the purpose that it was made, but it would be humorous. It would be absurd. What would you notice about a human body trying to use a bicycle underwater? What would that do to the story if, so you told a story about a person using a bicycle underwater to go rescue someone? And so all of that connects to, what does the object, or you're trading an object for a word. So what does the object do in the world? That's almost like the association of the word. Like I can say cloud, and it could be a thundercloud. It could be a cloud of mist. There's a whole bunch of associations. We could have a bicycle. You could think about your childhood. You could think about a delivery person. You could think about going over mountains. Or maybe in your culture, only men ride bicycles. I don't know. And so it would mean something like, I'm not saying anything. I'm just like running with this idea. If only men rode bicycles, and you took a bicycle and you put a woman on it in your picture, you would be saying an idea.
Yeah.
Right. So we take these physical things in the world, or we take these cultural assumptions around objects or around materials, and then we express our ideas with them. And that's part of what art does. That's also very similar to just what making things in the world does. This is why arts and entrepreneurship go hand in hand, because people are often building things to solve problems. So you can build and make things to solve problems. You can build and make things to be beautiful. You can build and make things to be funny or to say something.
Yeah.
So it's just another way of speaking, just with your hands and with mud or paint. And you talk about Cartesian dualism. I think that we fragmented the way that we think about how we are human. I think we're so limited by words, and I love words. I
Yeah.
studied literature. I love words, but there is so much that goes beyond words. But dang, do we love our words? We spend a lot of time talking.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look what we're doing right now.
I know. I mean, it's one of the easiest ways to relate to other people. And I think so maybe that's why the other mediums can feel more separate and more special because it takes a
Mhm.
different kind of time to do those things.
Yeah.
And that's why I think culture forms around the arts because you have to, as a group of people, agree to dedicate time to go do that thing and
Mhm.
then like share it together or have something that connects it all together. So um I just don't see it as separate. I don't know that I ever really have, but that's probably because of the way I grew up.
Yeah. What do you mean by don't see? What are the things that you don't see as separate? Maybe I lost the thread there for a second.
I didn't necessarily see painting or drawing or typing on the computer or building something. They were separate activities, but I didn't necessarily see them as not possible for expression because it felt the
Mhm.
same when you were making things in each of them
Yeah.
fundamentally. I'm really going back into the childhood brain when I
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
that. Like hammer and a nail and the absorption that you get when you're focusing on taking agency in the world like that.
Mhm.
It's the same as when you're concentrating on drawing. It's the same as when you're like writing your little like, oh, this is going to be a great story when you're 12 and you're trying to like imagine yourself as an author.
Yeah.
It's the same as when you're like getting immersed in a dance or in a sport. Like it's all about being in that zone.
Yeah.
So
You
that
know,
to me is that.
it,
That's
it's
what it
in,
is.
it's interesting because thinking back to my own when I have been most artistic, it's either been through word, so either through preaching or um, poetry or like storytelling of some kind, or through performance. Because as a hobby for a long time, I've kind of fallen off with this more recently. I'm a magician, and so I would do magic tricks, and it was very performative. And in the performance, especially if you're doing close-up magic, it's something that it is pretty intimate in a sense because like everyone's participating in the trick. And I think it creates an atmosphere where like I'm doing the thing, but I can't do the thing without others there to like experience it and participate in it. And every single performance, even if I'm doing the same trick, is different based on the people in the
Mm-hmm.
room. And so it is a very participatory experience. And there's the mechanics behind it that a lot of people try and figure out. But one of the things that I've loved about it is that it's never really been about like the performance isn't about the mechanics. It's about the experience that it brings together and the way that it creates something that kind of transcends itself. Does that make sense? And
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you mentioned the participatory thing, and I remember actually watching a video, Jonathan Peugeot, about the participatory and contemporary art and its
mm,
parallels to liturgy. And so I'm listening to you talking, and I'm thinking like there's the individual satisfaction that you get from maybe refining your tricks. Like that's a form of practicing your art, but it's really preparatory for the main thing,
mhm,
right? And I think about how there's something about the preparing that then necessitates the gathering.
yes.
There's the preparing and then there's the gathering. And this is true for visual work, it's true for performance, for music, I'm going to lump sports into there because
Yeah.
let's be real. That's sports is a liturgy.
Yes.
And
Yes.
especially in America.
hmm
Um,
Saturday football.
Better football, or even and artists, especially the visual artists, and I'm going to speak for visual artists because that's the folks that's me, and that's also the folks I'm closest to. They're notoriously introverted, But I think that's because it requires so much concentration to prepare and it requires so much time. But ultimately, everybody wants to be seen. They want their work seen, whether it mean in the marketplace or in the performance space, or even just appreciated.
Yeah.
So there's a natural drive to build and share. I think that's the rhythm of art.
Mhm.
That's the natural rhythm of art. And some people are content to just build and build and build and build and never share. And that's because I'm getting really prescriptive here. So I may change my mind later. But I believe that in part that can because they are building and then taking the lessons from that and it gets shared in another part of their life.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
you can,
there have been things that, I talked a little bit about one of my artistic mediums being words. I've written things that may never see the light of day, but they've helped change me and informed me. That way, when I go interact with people,
right.
I'm now different in that space because of the thing that I produce.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great example of that. I
So,
think I also think there's an art to the community gathering piece.
mhm.
I think it's connected to architecture. I'm folding into the
Yeah,
how does can art shape a community question.
yeah,
Um, I think that if you're thinking about liturgical art, the art is in the service of the community reinforcing its beliefs and teaching its people what the truth of the world is. And
Can you say that again?
so the architecture and the art in a church serves to help a community reinforce its beliefs and share its teachings with its people.
Yeah,
It catechizes its people.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and so if you think about that, any artistic gathering can teach people. We relearn how to gather. And so it's really interesting to me to think about like there's all these like visual art openings where you go and there's a specific ritual and expectation when you go to a white box gallery and you have the little wine and the cheese and you go and you stand awkwardly and you have to stare at the paintings and yada yada right. And maybe you see the artist and you can awkwardly walk up to them, but maybe they don't want to talk to you because they're like terrified at their own opening. Or maybe it's a really high flying New York City gallery where you're trying to figure out who the gallery owner is. So maybe you could get a show in the space, or I don't know. Like there's all kinds of things that happen sort of almost ritualistically around this gallery structure that's developed. But then there's the festival rhythms, where people are gathering to sell their work and it's a marketplace and there are norms for what you would expect to see at a festival and people gather and they have their expectations and it happens in a certain way and that type of space serves to be an economic engine and a pleasurable engine for the community to gather and be seen in a specific way and that relationship is a little bit less hierarchical. It's more interactive, participatory, um, and less exclusive. So these gatherings around different kinds of art can be more public, more private, more exclusive, more inclusive, but they all have their rhythms. And at one point in time, I tried to make art for the marketplace, found it really was not a good lifestyle fit for me for a variety of reasons. Um, I'm very open about how I have a chronic illness and I can't work like a machine, nor can I mass produce
Yeah.
lots of things all at once. So I happen to find myself in this gallery structure, which tends to be more exclusive and hierarchical. And to be honest, that kind of makes me sad, but I think, to combat that by making work that is beautiful and or about important things. So not all of my work is about my chronic illness, but I I find that sharing these personal and significant things is one way for me to make it a little bit more accessible and intimate and participatory, because then it becomes about sharing a story. And everybody wants to be seen, and chronic illness is in many ways notoriously invisible. And I'm by no means a spokesperson for all people with chronic illness, but it's also not easy to talk about.
Yeah.
And if there are things that I can make or say that make it easy for a community to talk about, or give people a place where they can go and come to an understanding about something and learn, like catechesis,
Yeah.
or relate and reinforce and feel seen themselves, then that is how my work is folding into that process. And that's on accident. I'm just making stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. But you make from the person that you are, and so it naturally
Right.
flows out of your experiences that are informed not just by your chronic illness, but by the way that you've been formed by your particular religious community,
Yeah.
and the way that you've been formed
Where's
by
my
your
quote?
upbringing.
Oh, I had a quote on the wall and it was over there and I think I moved it, but it was from Corita Kent, the nun, um, who said that you don't like you don't express yourself with the material. It's like you come through it. You are
Mm,
filtered through it.
hmm. Yeah.
So that's if you're trying to express a thing, you're doing it wrong, because you don't have to try.
Yeah.
It's just going to happen.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of when Tolkien was talking, like when he produced his first draft of The Lord of the Rings, he realized that many Christian themes were already embedded in the story. And he did that unintentionally. And what he
Mm,
did on his second pass through is he just made them slightly more explicit. And so it was a natural byproduct of the person that he was, that when he wrote The Lord of the Rings, those Christian elements, because of the person that he is, were present in his story. And it took some
yeah.
fine tuning to bring them out, but it was the natural flow of the person that he was. And I think in The Divine Conspiracy, Dallas Willard talks about how the work of a Christian is not to do things. It's or not to what was this phrase? It's not to fulfill the law. It's to become the kind of person in whom the law is naturally fulfilled. And his point there is like our work is to be catechized and liturgized into a new kind of person that is shaped in such a way that we do naturally produce good fruit.
This absolutely, I love this, because I'm sorry, this randomly connects to a podcast I listened to last week.
Yeah.
It was about Confucian thought.
Hmm.
It was about Eastern thought, and about effortless effort, Wu Wei.
Yeah.
Um, it was hidden brain, like when trying too hard doesn't help you out or something. You can look it up. But the they were talking about how, would you rather receive help from somebody who um who's just generally joyful and helpful and generous without thinking about it, or would you rather receive help from somebody who like believes that it is their duty to show up for other people and will help you? Like what's going to feel better to
Yeah.
you? And it's like the person who's just going to do it automatically
Yeah.
is going to feel better. But the speaker, who is very much into Eastern thought and Confucian thought, was saying that Immanuel Kant believed that it didn't count if you were good if you hadn't thought through that, like, this was your moral duty to do this thing.
Yeah.
But he missed the point that you were trying to make, which is that the belief that you should behave in this way needs to be unconscious. It needs to be so automatic as to be unconscious, because that is what shows you that you have made it just a habit of being.
Mhm. Mhm.
So so I was laughing because I was trying to think, like, I'm going to be a good person. Like, I'm just going to try really
Yeah.
hard. Like,
Yeah.
that's not how you do it.
Yeah. Well, and
So,
this is St. Paul's whole problem with law
mhm.
fulfillment. It's
Yes,
it's not that
yes.
fulfilling the law is wrong. It's that
No.
aiming at the law, aiming at doing the law is only aiming at doing the law. It's not aiming at that transformative piece. And
Yeah, it's
so,
missing the point. I kind of feel like that's what AI is, actually.
ooh, okay.
Anyway, that's a like AI is aiming at something and missing the point entirely.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, there's that's I'm pointing up here because it's aiming this way, and there's a thing over here. It's
Mhm.
in space. I
Yeah.
can feel it in space somehow.
Yeah.
It's strange. Um, yeah, yeah.
So, anything else on that question? If not, I'll move to a
Well,
slightly related.
I wanted to talk about how, since we were sort of on the topic of my work and how it functions,
Yeah.
talking about how it has its own catechesis and has its own, that makes it sound really elevated and like I'm really snotty about it. But no, it's saying something. It's saying
Well,
something that I believe to be important. And but it's not sacred art.
yeah.
It's very much not sacred art. And I did make a piece that I made a piece for the exhibit at Stanford University, which you were very generous in giving me the opportunity to do, that involved iconography. It
Yeah.
had sources of sacred art in it, but um, I very intentionally did not want to make a piece of sacred art, because making a piece of sacred art is making something with prayer to point at the truth in a setting of worship. That is what it means. Um, for I mean, I'm not a theologian, but that is what it means to me as an Orthodox Christian, as Jocelyn
Point of
Mathewes, the Orthodox Christian.
Yeah, point of clarification. Isn't
Yeah.
there also within the Orthodox Church a process by which, like a very regimented process by which the sacred art is produced? So it's not just,
Yes. I mean, yeah, it's not, there are self-taught iconographers in America, because, and usually they go out and they seek mentorship, because the painting process for making icons is very different from how you're taught in an art school. It's very different how you use specific materials for theological reasons and also for traditional reasons. Um, so yeah, I haven't had the opportunity or to go and pursue any of that, nor have I been called to do so.
yeah,
I told God, if you want me to make this work, you're going to have to make it impossible for me to do anything else. Because only then will I know. And I've prayed this many times, and I have said it to other people, and he hasn't yet gotten me to making icons yet, so it must not be time.
yeah.
I've
I mean, you said
probably
that to me before.
Yeah, I have, and it probably means there's more work to be done in my heart, or maybe it will never be given to me. So may it never be given to me, so that I can keep working on polishing whatever this dirty stone is. um but that, yeah, so you have to do it prayerfully. You usually have, I mean, if you can, you do it with the blessing of your spiritual father, and with a bishop. And um and I mean, there's so many different, and it often involves a lot of old processes that are not uh they use old materials that aren't taught in the US. So there's a lot of work that goes into the sacred arts traditions in the Orthodox Church. And I made a piece that was called "More Spacious Than the Heavens." It's a cyanotype print. It references iconography, and to my mixed emotions, I've seen people who've taken that print and put it in their icon corner, and
Mhm.
I have very mixed feelings about that. Like, I'm honored, and at the same time very frightened.
Yeah,
Like, oh, I didn't mean to make an icon. It's not an icon.
yeah,
Um, but I'm so glad that the image moves people to want to put it in their icon corner. Like that is the piece that makes me glad. And I'm glad that it can be a tool for worship. I'm very, very glad for that. But my work is not sacred art because I think that um, there, I like to think that my work is illustrating a how rather than pointing to a truth. Like that here is a how of what is happening, but the truth is like the stuff around it. I have assumptions about what the truth of the world is, and um what suffering in the world means, what creation signifies and what its purpose is, what humanity's purpose is, what my role is in everything. And all of those assumptions are the background for the things that I make. Kind of like what
Yeah.
Tolkien's draft is.
Yeah.
So and ministry is a how, right? We're talking about like the way that art mirrors ministry, or
Yeah.
what is the role of art in the life of a Christian. Um, your art is going to be how you execute something creatively in the world with all of your assumptions about what you know about God and
Yeah.
yourself and
Yeah.
your purpose. Did I answer the question? I probably went on a huge tangent.
No, well, I mean, I think you, I mean, it's your answer to the question, right? So it's
Right.
whatever your answer is, and
Argue
that,
with me.
I mean, I can't because I agree. I mean, I think that that is there needs to be a place for both to operate, and so I mean, at least in for my sake, I'm glad that you aren't producing that sacred art and you're producing something else that can speak to a different audience or the same audience in a different way. Your
Mm.
piece more sacred than the heavens, I absolutely love, and um, it reminds me of a this might actually be the root of where the title comes from because I'm not sure how it. I know it's part of the Orthodox
It's part of the
liturgy.
hymnography for nativity, more spacious,
Um,
and your womb became more spacious than the heavens.
yeah, there's a line from a church father. I don't remember Cyril of Alexandria, maybe. Um, and he's talking about how simultaneously uh, the the divine word is dwelling in all of the cosmos and in the womb
Yes.
of the Virgin. And it so every time I look at it, I go back to history of Christianity and my master's degree, reading that line, and my mind's blown, and I'm like almost in tears just because of the magnificence of that moment. So anyway, I say that to say,
It's a
like,
great moment.
yes, and to feel the weight of that, and then to get to experience that again because of a piece of art and the way that it
Yeah.
beautifully exemplified. I mean, your your depiction reminded me of words that I read that reminded me of a reality that I hope to live into every day.
Yes.
And so, like,
Yes.
all of these things are different things, but they're all pointing to the same thing. And so, yeah, I'm very happy for that. That the way that they all coalesce together nicely, and yet, um, you're able to do that because it's not sacred art, to your point. And so,
Right. Well, I mean, in that sense, it is functioning a little bit more like sacred art, but
yeah,
it's meant to be more of an illustration than
mhm,
an icon.
yeah,
But um, yeah, I mean that the tools that are used to produce art are the same tools because they're orienting.
yeah,
So they can orient you to prayer, they can orient you to contemplation, they orient you to worship.
yeah.
So
So, only slight transition. We've been talking about the way that art, I mean, that is an example of art that I've seen moving me deeply, art that you produced. A lot of, I mean, when I think of generally, by and large, Christian art, and I don't practice in the Orthodox Church, and so this would probably change it were I in that context. But when I think about Christian art, I typically think of like shallow pop Christian art that doesn't really feel or seem that deep when I engage it.
can you
Um,
give me some recent examples of maybe what you've seen? it's been a while since I've been in the
Yeah.
non-Orthodox world. And so I have some old classics in my head, and I have a lot of, oh man, I have 90s CCM in my brain, along with, I had some great scripture t-shirts when I was a teenager. Yeah, I had great stuff. So but I may be very out of touch.
No, well, I mean, I probably am too at this point, if I'm being honest, because I do generally steer away from that kind of thing because of the way that I feel like it doesn't engage the whole of the person in the whole of the Christian story. So that this
Hmm.
maybe a little bit of my own biases there, but let's just, I mean, I can't think of a particular example of visual art off the top of my head, but let's
Hmm.
maybe, for instance, maybe you're not familiar with this, but a piece of more theatrical art, the movie God's Not Dead, for example. It
Oh, I
it
have not
it
seen
really
this.
so okay. Basically, it's about a college student who like stands up in his philosophy class, and the teacher's teaching on Nietzsche and like God is dead, and he's like, "No, God's not dead," and it's like an exercise missing the point, in my opinion, because you aren't really understanding what Nietzsche's saying. But okay, this isn't going to work because you haven't seen.
I can Wikipedia the plot real quick.
Yeah. So anyway, what I typically
But
mean by shallow Christian art is art that it attempts to depict a Christian truth, but in a way that is the truth is so explicit and on the surface that there's no depth there. And so there seems to be a depth to the art that we were just talking about that I feel like a lot of other Christian spaces seem to be
hmm,
lacking. And
I think this may intersect with, I don't want to blame I don't want to blame anybody, right? I think I'm going to lay the problem at the feet of the difficulty in American culture to be vulnerable.
mm,
And it's been a long time since I've inhabited a Christian space where art functions in that way, or where
yeah.
there is an art that is very overt and didactic and prescriptive. Well, okay, I say that, and Orthodox Christian art is very overt and didactic and prescriptive, but it's rooted in a very different understanding of what spiritual success looks like. In fact, there is no spiritual success. Like, even using that word is like super loaded in our culture, because to be successful um, can mean, um, like, to be a successful Christian can mean, in our sort of generic Protestant swath, or
Yeah.
generic whatever swath we have of I'm going to call it pseudo Christian culture, is to be beautiful, materially wealthy, and um, positive all the time.
Yeah.
It's like an aggressively, um, it's closer to the prosperity gospel than it is to, um, at least, image based.
Yeah.
Because if you look at some of the early Protestants, not all of them, there's the Quakers and the Mennonites and others, but there was a swath of them that did believe that God would bless you with material wealth and prosperity, and that was a sign of, I mean, that's always been, it's down in the Bible that that's a sign of God's blessing. And so I think that, um, there is a fear of suffering and shame. And again, I don't want to blame Protestantism or Christians. I think it's like a uniquely American thing. I don't think, because I think that there are even Orthodox people who are scared of it too. So I'm going to say it's a uniquely American thing to be averse to death and to not want to look suffering in the eye and to want to have a life that is perfect on the outside.
Yeah.
And so the art reflects that.
Yeah.
And it restates, it's like it restates it restates the thesis without building the proofs and the arguments.
Yeah.
And visually, it's so tough. It's so tough for, I think, modern Christian artists because they have to go back to history, which means that they may be mimicking or even going in depth into traditions that belong to denominations that exist, but with whom they don't have theological affinity,
Yeah.
which can create some tension, or they have to draw from the symbolic language of um, other forms of art history and other places, which means that the art isn't going to say the same things. So this is really tricky. I'm fumbling around.
No. Well, I mean, it's a difficult
um,
question, and it's one
yeah.
that Luke and I have been actively thinking about for a while. He at one point, this was not we were recording the podcast pretty early days, and he played to me two scenes that are very similar in two different movies. One is I'd never seen it before, a Kirk Cameron movie. He's like a good old Protestant, just who acts and does movies, and a lot of his movies are observed by a lot of people in the kind of churches that I grew up in, like Baptist and Pentecostal
Mm-hmm.
settings. And it was a movie about marital strife, called Fireproof. And it's about like fireproofing your marriage, which again is like kind of overt. And there are a lot of like the fight itself in this scene doesn't even really feel like a real fight. It feels like a scripted fight. I mean, it was, because everything is just stated overtly. And then he played for me a scene in Good Will Hunting. I don't know if you've seen that movie.
Yes, I've seen that
And
movie.
Matt Damon and his girlfriend in the movie, I forget her name, they have a very sophisticated fight on screen. And it feels like a real couple fight. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of like undertones that you pick up if you're paying attention, but if you're not paying attention, you don't. And so they feel very different. And I think you're right. It's because it's trying to be didactic. And because it's trying to be didactic and it's about like knowing the thing, it has to put it on the surface for you to like be able to grasp onto immediately. And I do think that comes from this like American performance. Yeah, I mean, I think your assessment was very
Well,
correct.
and if you also think about it from like a teacher's perspective, it can be really uncomfortable to have to deal with those things in large groups
Hmm.
and large crowds. I know that I don't have as much familiarity with like the context in which these pieces of art are being experienced or how large the groups are experiencing it.
Yeah,
But you have to, it can be really hard to be putting that kind of content into like a ministerial context
yeah.
in some ways.
Hmm.
I think that we do have to very very closely examine like, okay, where are these pieces meant to live?
Yeah,
Good Will Hunting is meant to be seen by a lot of people. It's assumed to be a work of fiction.
yeah,
It's going to say something about its characters and the nature of the world because it is a piece of cinema.
yeah,
But this other movie, I'm guessing it's intended for use in ministry. It's serving a very different purpose, and so therefore, I do think there may be some like ethical challenges with
yeah.
making a more realistic fight scene.
Mhm. Yeah,
Maybe it gets too real too fast,
yeah,
or it could be traumatizing to the people who are coming for a lesson. Like,
yeah,
so let's also be careful to make sure that we're,
yeah.
examining the art in context.
No,
But
no, that's definitely fair.
yeah,
I
yeah.
I would say, I mean, the example of Fireproof, I mean, it was like viewed in theaters, came out in that kind of format. And
Good to know.
and so like it
Okay.
was like ministerial in the sense that like basically only Christians went to it and tried to make sure that it was a good box office hit. But it was presented, at least, as a didactic movie to go to theaters and watch, sure, but it was attempting to be a Christian version of a certain kind of thing that exists in other formats, and
Yeah.
seems to fail to do that in some sense.
I wonder how much of that, and again, I think we're getting into territory where I feel less and less confidence, which is
Yeah,
great because
that's
I
fine.
definitely need to be re-examining some of my assumptions and my thoughts all at all times. I'm very susceptible to
Yeah,
to mistakes.
same.
But the I wonder how much of it has to do with the desire to be loud in the culture. Um, and wanting to make a box office hit, wanting to be seen as something attractive and valuable to the world when we have been told over and over again that the world is going to hate you.
Yeah,
feels like feels like you're trying to make them love you, and the thing is that you can't.
yeah,
But I did go to um the Symbolic World Conference earlier this year, which I know that I already told you about. But
yeah,
when somebody raised the very question in that conference, it's like, so how do we go out and how can I make Christian art? And I think this was, one of the speakers. I'm blanking on their name. Forgive me if I don't attribute you properly. You're probably not watching this, but they said, well, don't worry about making Christian art, just make good art. And I think that points back to what we were discussing about how you, as you work on being a Christian, your art will show it through. And so all you have to do is to focus on making it good and refining your craft
yeah,
and refining your ideas and getting better and better at it. And there's a lot of freedom in that
yeah.
to just guess what? If you are a Christian, that part is taken care of. So I don't think there's anything wrong with being didactic. It just
Yeah,
may mean that your audience is different.
yeah,
And as with any project, if your intended audience is not the one that you were hoping for, just pay attention to it
yeah.
because maybe the people who are there are getting what they need out of it.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good. Thank you for your two
I'm
cents.
preaching it myself.
I mean, and me. And so, as we kind of round out the last bit of this conversation,
Yeah.
want to ask, uh,
Thank you for this, by the way.
of
This is great
course,
for my own thinking. I
and
love these kinds of things because I walk around with these ideas in my head, but then there's like new things that I need to, and I refine my ideas, and then I go and I pray some more, and then maybe, oh, well, if I'm good, I pray some more,
yeah,
figure more things out.
yeah, um, that's very akin to my process too. If I'm good, I pray some more. So, and yeah, and we'll have to do this again sometime. This
Okay,
has been very great.
I'm here for
Um,
it.
so, rounding out the conversation, Luke and I talk a lot about the Christian imagination. Um, at least we've been talking in private about this, and we're trying to transition this podcast into a way of helping us express the way that we feel about, and what I mean by Christian imagination is the way we see the world and the way we be in the world, and th- this inhabited space of being a Christian in God's creation, and how we experience and exist in that. And we're trying to, this is our goal, and we're probably failing in many, many ways at this, but retune the way we as people see and be in the world to be more authentically in line with Christian principles and practices, And we're hoping that we can kind of help other people along that path too. So that's kind of a little bit of like missional jargon. But is there any way that you think like, what's going on in the church right now at large in your particular context, or you see in other contexts that you think needs to be reoriented to help us see and be properly?
I don't, oh man, big question.
I know.
Big question. Many of the things that are going to come out of my mouth are things that I am personally tackling. I think we are too afraid of the call to be martyrs. And I don't mean that in the sense of people are going to come at us in the culture wars. They will. People are going to come at you and kill you because war is coming. Maybe it is. We are too afraid of those things. We're too afraid of those big things, but we're also too afraid of the little martyrdoms as well. Thomas Hopko has Christian maxims. You can look them up on the internet. And one of them is to be simple, humble, gentle, and small. And there's like nothing in our culture that tells you to be simple, humble, gentle, and small. I think that's a martyrdom. I don't want to be any of those things.
Yeah.
I'm going to work on it.
Yeah.
But that's how. Oh, and then there's like how you do the small things is how you do the big things. You don't have to do big things. You just have to do the small things well, and just do what's in front of you.
Yeah.
But then also to believe in real miracles because they happen all the time, and they happen in that cheesy way where it's like, I'm alive again today. What a miracle.
Yeah.
And then there are like truly miraculous stories of people who are rescued from danger or who turn their lives around miraculously. And it's your attention is a beam that you can focus. And so I think if you pay attention to what you pay attention to, that will tell you a lot about where you're oriented. And so maybe trying to slowly open yourself up to paying attention to the miracles and being aware of just how embedded you are in the forces of the market and the forces of technology. It's just, and I say those last two things to my kids all the time
Yeah.
because our American culture is so, all of that is so assumed about who you are as a person. We go on and on about consumer culture, but that you are segmented into this bucket, that your hobby is your identity, your particular fashion statement is your identity. And I actually think that there's a danger in getting too attached to any identity, and any identity that's more specific than human.
Mhm.
um, because even if you think of yourself as male or female, it's important to remember that. But the moment that you start being like other sex or something like, or that group of people, you're cutting a piece of yourself off.
Yeah.
So the forces of the market are going to make you do that.
Yeah.
And the forces of technology will as well cut you off from people. So all of those things are affecting our imagination. and trying to be the focus of the beam of our attention. So it's probably a matter of doing the things that I don't like doing, which means like unplugging, abstaining. It's like it goes back to like food and dieting, right? Ingest the things that are good, stay away from the things that are gonna make you feel bad or make you sick. Um, I used to not believe my parents when they said stuff like, I was like, oh, you shouldn't watch that. That's just ugh, or that's garbage, or that like, that has just that's just really dark and ugly. And now I'm saying the same things to my children. Like, why do you want to watch that? Like, you need to know that this is saying this about this thing. And so wise as serpents, gentle as doves. None of this advice is new.
Yeah.
There's nothing particularly wrong that's new about the Christian imagination. It's like stuff we already know. We just
Yeah.
refuse to learn.
Yeah. Well, our mission statement is recapturing the Christian
Yeah,
imagination. And so we're attempting to, right? We don't want to presume that we are. And so
right.
it is about returning to the things that we've lost because of our market-heavy culture, our technology, or other things that have been pulling or pushing us in directions more recently that aren't good
Ooh,
ones.
resist the temptation of like being marketed a lifestyle and return to something nostalgic.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
that feels like a screw tape letters move.
Yeah.
Like, instead of actually learning to do the old knowledge, you just watch TikToks about it. There's a finger pointed right at me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and me for having the podcast with this is the mission statement, right? How
Yeah.
much, I'm trying to work this out myself, which is one of the reasons why I do this, but how much am I really?
Well,
That's a valid
talking
question.
talking about something is the first step to doing something about it.
Yeah, that's
In
true.
some ways, like there's people who are like, oh, why can't we just stop talking and start doing things? It's like, well, sometimes you have to discuss things
Yeah.
and test your ideas and try things out and maybe be accountable to somebody to then go and do something.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Oh,
it's a good thing. I do think the church needs to stop trying to be popular. It just needs to
yeah.
feed feed sheep.
That's good. That's good. Well, on that, let me let me end this recording.